Welcome to Life with Strings Attached. I'm your host, Jamie Gale. Today on Life with Strings Attached, we're joined by legendary luthier and guitar repair icon, Dan Erlewine. In this engaging conversation, Dan Erlewine and I explore his personal journey from his early influences in a creative family to becoming a renowned luthier. Rich with anecdotes from Dan's experiences in the 1960s music scene, detailing his experiences with iconic musicians like Jerry Garcia and Albert King, the impact of the Summer of Love, and how he ended up opening up for Eric Clapton's Cream at the Fillmore, how Mike Bloomfield convinced Dan to sell him his 1959 Les Paul, and even how Dan and his bandmates gave punk rock legend Iggy Pop his name. Of course, we also discussed the change in guitar repair and education, highlighting his contributions to the field and the importance of sharing knowledge in the craft. Dan and I also explored the evolution of guitar, how musicians have influenced guitar design and the market. We delved into current trends in guitar design, including the rise of ergonomic, multiscale, and baritone guitars, and the impact of technology on sound reproduction. Finally, in our special extended edition only on patreon.com, Dan shares valuable advice for aspiring guitar professionals, emphasizing the importance of mentorship and hard work. I thoroughly enjoyed my conversation with Dan Erlewine. I hope that you do as much as I did. Dan.
Good morning,
nice
Jamie.
Nice to see you. Welcome to Life with Strings Attached. How are you today?
I'm glad to be here.
Great. Good to hear. How are things there in Ohio?
They're about going to be 71 degrees today, and it's sunny finally. It's been raining, and it's good.
Good. Springtime.
You're getting there.
You feeling like it? Yeah? All right. Glad to hear. Man, there's if I didn't know what it was already, I'd be really confused. I think you have a highly polished chrome guitar behind you, which looks like an anomaly somehow, like a spirit of a guitar, because we can't quite define it. Is that what's happening?
That is an aluminum neck and body Stratocaster.
Yes. Yeah. It's really undefined from the background. It's fascinating. it looks a bit elusive.
Is
that something?
Is it okay if it's sitting there?
Oh yeah, it's just fine. Yeah. Is that something you've been working on?
I call it a strational.
Oh.
You know, a national steel.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
This has the sound of a national steel, but it's electric. And the bodies were part of the, I've got 4 of them or 5 of them, I think. They were part of the Harley Davidson Stratocaster run in 1993 for their 93rd anniversary. They made a run of 109. My friend was the engraver, and when it was all done and said, he had these bodies left over in boxes that never got engraved, and he called me about 11 years ago and asked me if I wanted them. Sure. So I bought them, and they've been sitting here until COVID is over and all kinds of stuff. So I'm putting necks on the bodies, and they're pretty awesome.
Okay, and those will be Erlewine.
These would be that one right there is already sold to a good friend of mine, Chris Blakely, also known as Fried Okra. He's a guitar player and collector down in Mississippi.
Yep.
And I just took it to the Artisan Guitar Show, and people really liked it. So we're putting 4 or 5 more together, and one of them is a Telecaster, oddly enough.
Oh, okay. And did they do a run of Telecasters that way, or was it just?
They didn't know. I don't know how that body got into. I don't know. All I know is that it came from whoever made the bodies for Fender, and one's a Tele, so that's going to be another very unique one.
Great. And are they fully hollow inside?
Fully hollow, and the sound of them is unbelievable. It's nothing like I've ever heard in a guitar before. When you bend strings on a highly polished nickel-plated fretboard, it's like pushing strings over ice. Later on, if you want, I'll bring one over and I'll bend a couple strings for you.
Yeah. I'd love to I'd love to hear that. We've had some aluminum body guitars on tour with the Boutique Guitar Showcase from Noah, which is a architectural project out of Milan. But it is a guitar, and those are Telecaster style guitars, but they've always had wooden necks on them. I don't think I've played. Well, Valeno had all aluminum guitars
They have
also, but
them.
they weren't. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And we've had a Valeno guitar on tour with us before also, but I don't think I've played a Stratocaster in that style and that. With the does it have a traditional sort of floating pickguard and everything's mounted to the pickguard as it would be in a normal Stratocaster?
It has a floating tremolo, two-point fulcrum tremolo.
Okay.
Jason Lawler wound the pickups. I asked him, what would you make for a hollow aluminum guitar that would be a great blues pickup?
Mm-hmm.
And he wound these, and he likes them so well that he's adding it to his line.
Oh, great.
He
Mm-hmm.
calls them the Super Strat.
Super Strat. Yeah, yeah.
Whenever
Okay.
you like, I'll bring it over and give you a better, closer look, if you want.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, yeah. Well, we're always happy to see new and interesting guitars. That's obviously a shared interest of ours. And so it's novelty for me that always inspires me. I've never really wanted to make music that other people made. I've never really wanted to be just like someone else in that way. I've always been interested in new possibilities. And so a guitar that I haven't played before is always super inspiring to me. I'm not so into. I know lots of people are really into vintage guitars, and I like, I like a vintage guitar when it's something really interesting or novel that I haven't played before. Um, but otherwise, I'm not particularly interested in sounding just like X. I'm always
Sure.
interested in what new sounds can happen, what new inspiration can happen, And so any guitar like that I haven't played something just like that before. I'm always super interested in in experiencing it, getting to know it for the first time. So yeah. Anyways, it's in some of our previous conversations, you and I have talked about some of those novel experiences because you've had a bunch of experiences that are now, well, I guess kind of normal, but they weren't normal when you had them. They were new. They were new experiences, and that's one of the reasons I enjoy speaking with you so much is to hear the excitement and the novelty of things when not everybody knew what it was like to play a Les Paul. When not everybody knew what it was like, to experience electric blues music. You told me stories before about the first time you're hearing something or someone shared an album with you, and that sort of novel experience. It's something that we don't get to go back in time and do.
No, of course not.
Yeah, yeah. But I often wonder as I travel around what it was like to see things for the first time. I'm in an old place here in Italy, from the 15th century, and I walk the streets here every day, and I look at buildings often, and I wonder, you sort of transport yourself back in time and say, what was it like for someone to experience that building when it was new, and what were the streets like, and what were people doing at the time? What was the feeling like during that time?
Do you live
And
in
so
Italy now?
I split my time between our home in Canada and our home in Tuscany. So this is our Tuscan home. Yeah, and
How's
so
the weather?
it's pretty good.
Looks like you got
It's
a little sunshine.
Yeah, it's like a Canadian summer or like an Ohio summer here right now. Like this week, I'm sorry, Dan, I don't speak Fahrenheit. Um, but this week it's probably somewhere in those mid 70s to maybe even low 90s. It's going up to 23, 24 degrees this week in sunshine. Again, I don't know exactly what the conversion is on that on Fahrenheit, but it feels like a good Canadian summer day. Not too hot, but good for us Northerners. We don't like to sweat too much.
Oh,
So, yeah. Anyways, it's still very novel for us to experience. I've been coming to Europe for decades at this point in time, but I haven't lived in Europe for decades, and so we're still finding out new things all the time. So, yeah, and we have a long list of people who apparently are happy to have a friend here in Tuscany. A number of our friends in common are headed here, actually. Brian Gallup will be here shortly. Joe Glazer's on his way.
really? That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, Strandberg, Dingwall. I mean, there's a long list of guitar makers who are rolling through Italy and going to be making a stop at our place,
When is
staying for a
Brian
few
heading
days or a
over?
week. Brian is headed over. Well, I mean, by the time this podcast comes out, it'll probably be done already. But he'll be here in the middle of May. So I'm doing a symposium, a very small, exclusive symposium with a few guitar makers on legacy and succession, and we're sort of talking about what legacy and what a succession plan will look like. Because, as you're very well aware, this movement that blew up that we're all a part of, because of electric blues and rock and roll and country, a lot of those companies are now, 50 years old, some 40 years old or so. And for the first time, we're having to deal with the idea of, well, my kids don't really want it. Some kids want it, some don't. What's the future look like for these companies, and how do you successfully hand it on, especially if you've done something really innovative where there is going to be a future for sure. Some companies in our industry will close up now, and they will they will have had their time, but there's some who have made a substantial difference, and they will continue to move forward, and they'll be the companies that we're talking about, like we talked today about Fender or Martin or Gibson and those companies. And so it's time to have those discussions. And so we're gathering here, and that's a part of my role in the industry, is to facilitate sort of working business models and discussions and theory and practical advice. Yeah. So anyways, maybe you and Joan will make it over here at some point in time too, if you want to travel to
Well,
Italy.
that'd be something.
You're more than welcome. We're right by Florence. We're right in the heart of it all. And so
I knew Brian was going to Italy. I didn't realize it was to see you.
well, it's part of it. I can't tell you all his business here on the
Oh,
podcast,
I
but it's
think he's
part of why he's coming.
he does wood business there too.
He does, but the timing is around. The timing of the other things he's doing was built around this particular gathering with him and a few other guitar makers with me here. We've rented a private villa here in the hills where we can have some private discussions and just focus, turn the phones off, turn the computers off, and do nothing but focus on this topic for a couple of days.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
What time is
Yeah.
it there right now in Italy?
Right now it's 5 p.m. I'm 6 hours ahead of you. So we'll finish this up and then we'll go for a spritz before we go for dinner. That's what we do here in Italy. We go for food. we have food before the food. We have a spritz, then we have dinner. Yeah. So anyways, let's get back to you and what you've been doing. Dan, I think it's well, first of all, for our guests, I'll tell them we did this already a month or so ago, but we wanted to improve it a little bit in what we're doing, and so we're going to cover some of the topics that you and I talked about a month ago. But I really love to have some of your history from your perspective here, because even though I'm sure you feel like it's been documented and you've talked about it many times in your life, the reality is when I tell people about some of your unique experiences, they act as if they've heard them for the first time. They tell me they did not know that. And so, I'd love, if you're willing, to share it once again, to talk about the early days and what sort of made the Dan Erlewine that we know today. And, why are you the guy they put in front of the camera to share all these stories? And I think it has a lot to do with your origins and your experience before you got in front of the old video recorder. And so, shall we take a trip down memory lane?
Yes, we will.
All right. So Dan, initially, where, just tell me a little bit about your origin. Where were you born? When were you born, and to whom? I presume you come from a family just like the rest of us. Was that in Ohio, or was that somewhere else? Or
I was born in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, 1944. My parents both went to the U of M in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and my dad got a job. He had an MBA, and he got a job at a boiler company in Lancaster, PA, so they moved there. And they had 4 kids there, all boys. There's five brothers, but one wasn't born until they moved back to Ann Arbor. I was in Lancaster from 1944 to 1953. And We lived in the country, a lot of Amish people in that area, barns on each side, wheat fields, tobacco fields, and that was pretty much a normal kid playing in the fields, going to school. But my father his hobby was magic. He was a magician, and his other hobby would have been woodworking because he had all the tools, table saws and joiners and band saws way back.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother was an artist. She was an art major at U of M, got married and had 5 boys. So I grew up in a family of tools and artistic materials, everything from oil paints and casings and charcoals
Yeah.
and painting. And my dad had a wood shop, so he made nice wooden easels for us, the older boys. We all had our own easels with carriers for the crayons and paints. So that's what I would say led me into being a guitar person, doing things
But
with my hands.
that's a fascinating combination in your father. You said he graduated with an MBA, so he had a master's in business accounting. And did he work professionally as an accountant
He
for the
worked
boiler company?
for the boiler company. Then he got a job at Ford Motor, and he worked in. We went back to Michigan, where he came from.
Yeah.
He lived in Ann Arbor, and he worked for Ford Motor Company for many years in Dearborn. And
But was that as an accountant?
would be as an accountant
Or
and what I would call a businessman.
okay, well, that's really interesting because an accountant, they have a reputation of being pretty conservative, pretty worried. But your father was an accountant that was a magician, a hobby magician and woodworker. That's a fascinating combination.
When he was a teenager, he was doing magic shows. He opened for Harry Blackstone at one point. So he grew up really knowing a lot about magic and had magic books, all the books and tricks. So all of the kids learned magic tricks, and he would make us stage props, some pretty ornate tricks that you make out of wood with black wells so you can look through a hollow. There's a box with a big question mark. You can see through it, and you can drop a silk into it, and it disappears. He made all sorts of items like that for us. So
So he combined the woodworking with the magic. He made his own props.
yeah, and that was nothing for me then. By the time I got into junior high school or high school, if I wanted to have something or make something, I wasn't afraid to do it. I was encouraged to do it. By the
Yes.
time by the time I was in high school, let's say in 10th grade of high school, I got my first guitar. My dad always had a ukulele, a favia, and so I learned to play that. My mom played piano, and they listened to folk music. So I grew up listening to Burl Ives and Murray and Miranda from South Africa, Josh White Sr. So I heard a lot of guitar music, and it always fascinated me. Just I'd look at them on the record albums. Especially Josh White had what I would call now a Martin D40, a 0045, I think.
Yeah.
And I just was fascinated at looking at those Martin guitars. Then the Kingston Trio came out in 1959, and there was all these brand new looking Martins, and I wanted one. So in 10th grade, my older cousin took me into Detroit on Michigan Avenue to the pawn shops, and I bought a Domino, which was a cheap little plywood guitar, painted sunburst. The binding was pinstriped on with a little roller pin. It wasn't real binding. And that would have been 1960. And I took that home and stripped it. My dad had all the tools for finishing. The first thing I did was stripped all the finish off of it, stained the back and the sides brown, and left the top natural. So it looked kind of like a Martin. And I made inlays for the fretboard. My mother had a big collection of pearl buttons in a big container. Then I jigsawed out little bird wings and inlaid it in the fretboard. And when I look at it today, I don't have it anymore. But when I think back to it, it was like the inlays you see on a PRS,
Mm-hmm.
like flying doves. I thought they were doves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, so
That's
from
wonderful.
there, I mean, during that same time, I was taking woodshop courses in junior high school and high school. And my mother brought a set of Pennsylvania Dutch chairs when we lived in Lancaster. And she brought them up. Well, we had them all through my career, really.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And some of the spokes were broken on the back, some of the rungs that held the top on, and I took wood and whittled those out and replaced them and did a really good job. And the guitar thing kept on going. By the time I was in 11th grade, I had a Martin guitar, 0021, 0028,
Mm-hmm.
Coalwood, herringbone binding. And you could buy one like that cheap then. So I played
Really?
that through 11th grade and 12th grade.
Mm-hmm.
Is this going the direction you like? I mean, I'm
Yeah,
talking
keep
about
going.
guitars. In 12th grade, I went to school at St. Thomas Catholic School in Ann Arbor, and a lot of the guys in 11th grade and 12th, we all took jobs at McDonald's.
Mm-hmm.
It's about 3 or 4 of us that worked McDonald's, and I would
Which
make
would have
triple.
been new.
Hmm?
McDonald's was a
It was
new
a new
thing.
thing. I think the first McDonald's in Ann Arbor was 1959.
Mm-hmm.
It was back. That was back when the hamburger was 15 cents. Back when we'd clean the potatoes and cut them with the potato cutter, one
Yeah.
cutter, and that's of course now that's back when it would say over 500,000 sold.
And was it a 3-item menu back then?
Pretty
Because I mean,
much,
they
yeah.
started with just burgers, fries, and
Just
milkshakes, right?
burgers, burgers and fries, cheeseburgers.
Did you have a milkshake machine?
The milkshake was a real milkshake machine,
Yeah, yeah,
and I would make
yeah.
triple decker cheeseburgers, and I'd make grilled cheese sandwiches and take them up to Herb David's guitar studio. Herb was my mentor in the business,
Mm-hmm.
and try to win him over so I could get a job there. And when I graduated in 62, I was really laying it on there. And finally, I wanted to work in his shop. And he wanted me to work in the front as a salesman, which I
Mm-hmm.
did. And at one point I said, I really want to work in the shop. And he gave me a guitar and said, if you can fix this, I'll let you work in the shop. And it was a Southern Jumbo Gibson
Mm-hmm.
Rosewood. When I look back now with what I know, it was a very rare guitar. We've been through this before, but I'm telling you again. It
Yeah,
was like
yeah.
the one Woody Guthrie played, the early Southern Jumbo that didn't have binding on it.
Mm-hmm.
And it had a hole punched in the side on the bass side. And he said, do you think you can fix that? And I go, yep. I took it home, and my mother had a lot of art supplies. Like she had muslin on it. I glued muslin on the inside along the side as a backer. Then I filled it with plastic wood and painted it with oil paints. And it might have been caseins. We had all different kind of paints. And I painted rosewood color till it looked good. And actually it looked really good. And sprayed a clear Krylon on it. That's a spray can of lacquer.
Mm-hmm.
And that got me a job at Herb's working in the shop too, which was
That's great.
pretty cool in 1963.
Yeah. And you would bring them hamburgers from your job at McDonald's.
Well, that's what I quit. By that time, I quit working at McDonald's because I was working at Herb's. But junior and senior
Yeah.
year, I courted him with giant bags of fries.
Yeah.
And
Do you know Gary Chachi? He retired recently, but he was one of the owners of Premier Guitar Magazine. You know Gary from
I
Premier?
don't think so. I know the magazine.
Yeah, it's okay if you don't. Gary was one of their owners, but also a main sales guy. And Gary would go during NAMM show's setup day and go to McDonald's. And I don't know how many hamburgers he would buy, but he would walk around with this huge paper bag of McDonald's hamburgers, handing them out to all of the exhibitors and all of his customers as just kind of a memorable, nice thing to do. And he did that up until he retired only a couple of years ago. And so I think, when you tell me you'd show up with a bag of hamburgers and and fries to slowly court this guy over a couple of years, I wondered if you and Gary had ever talked about that, but obviously not.
No, we didn't, but he had a good idea. It worked.
Yeah.
So while I was in that Herb's, I also managed a coffee house in Ann Arbor called the Golden Vanity. And that was my nighttime job. It was in a large restaurant, Bimbo's Pizzeria. And it had a split wall. On one side it was the pizzeria, the other side they rented it out, and these two guys had a coffee house there. And in Ann Arbor, we had all kinds of music come through in the 60s. It was the right place to be. For example, one of the biggest groups we had there was barely known then. It was the Kentucky Colonels, Clarence White and Roland White. And the Kentucky Colonels, it was their first road trip. And their famous record, Appalachian Swing, hadn't come out yet, but it was in the works. And they played there for 2 weeks. And I had been finger picking the guitar with Herco picks, playing Railroad Bill and Freight Train, which back then I learned on the Pete Seeger's Folk Singers Guitar Guide album. Maybe you've seen it. It was a green record album, and it came with the book. And you learned how to play by tablature. And I was pretty deep into that. And when they played, here's Clarence White with a flat pick, and that's just knocked me out. And Clarence and Billy Ray Latham was the banjo player, and Roland White, the three of them came up to Herb's every day and gave lessons to make a little extra money on the side. So I got my first flat picking lesson from Clarence White. And I can still play what he showed me, but not very well. I never really did pick up finger picks again after that. Today I don't flat pick very much. I use just my bare fingers. I like the feeling of short nails and flesh on the strings. But in Ann Arbor we had everyone from Flatt and Scruggs come through, Herb Davids, to Andre Segovia, Julian Bream, Sabicas. Any big act that came there came through the folk music store, either to get strings or it was the place to go. Downtown Ann Arbor had the Stearns Music Collection, which was a musical instrument collection from hundreds of years past. They would have real Stradivarius violins and hurdy-gurdies. So that was a place you could stroll through and look. And with Herb's would get.
Is that in the Ford Museum now?
It was in the Stearns collection. I think
because there's a musical instrument collection like that in the Henry Ford Museum today, and I wonder if it was acquired by the Ford Museum.
I wonder. This would have been in Hill Auditorium or right next to it. You had Angel Hall and Hill Auditorium were the big music venues. But Herb was able to get his hands on some of those instruments and bring them back to the shop. It was just really awesome to see these incredible inlaid instruments I've never seen since, really. But Herb would make lutes for one thing. He also made tromba marinas, which is called the nun's trumpet. It's a one string giant, tall, almost looks like a balalaika. And you strum one note and it makes this sound It was called the nun's trumpet because they would play them in choruses, all tuned different, because it wasn't considered ladylike to be blowing on a horn.
Oh.
It wasn't proper. That's the story Herb told.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He built that. He built an Irish harp.
Mm-hmm.
So
Is it
we were those
the
of us in
Celtic
the.
harp, or is that different than a Celtic harp?
I
The
think a
same thing?
Celtic. Yeah, I think it's a Celtic harp. He was
Mm-hmm.
always building strange things, and a lot of the times he'd have myself or someone else in the shop do part of the work. You say, here,
Mm-hmm.
which is something I would do here in my own shop now. It's here, go ahead and finish this, carve this out and do that. So it was really good training.
Mm-hmm. So he was a proper luthier.
Yeah, when my parents left Ann Arbor in 1963 and moved to Big Rapids, Michigan, and my dad became the controller of Ferris State College, the older brother stayed back in Ann Arbor, and Herb sold his tools to Herb. Herb bought my dad's tools, so he had my dad's joiner, table saw, drill press, and van saw,
Mm-hmm.
which I'd grown up around. So I loved being in the shop and working on my dad's tools because
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have tools of my own at that point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wonderful.
And I worked at Herb's
Uh,
on and off until 1975. During all my band days, I might work at Herb's for a year and then quit and go back another half a year. I might get
mm-hmm.
fired sometimes for showing up late. It was
You get fired more than once from the same job?
yeah, from Herb.
Okay.
He was a folk store that didn't like electric instruments, so you didn't get electric guitars there or amps. And when our band, the Prime Movers Blues Band, got going, I wanted to get a Fender guitar. So I bought one at Cardi's Music in Ypsilanti. I bought a 63 Jazzmaster, and he fired me for that. I'm like, Herb, you don't like electric guitars.
Yeah.
That year, I also bought a 63 ES 335 Cherry Red.
Mm-hmm.
I went through guitars a lot. I guess I got
Mm-hmm.
the Cherry Red before the Jazzmaster.
Mm-hmm.
And I bought that on time. I'd pay him the payments. So in about 4 months, he took it back because I didn't keep the payments up.
Mm-hmm.
The same thing. I bought a sitar when the Beatles came out. I bought a sitar that was
Yeah.
reclaimed. I had a 53 D28 that had been stripped of the finish. That was a beauty. He reclaimed that. But I had my hands on a lot of instruments.
Yeah.
Probably the
So,
most famous one was that 59 Les Paul that had hung there in 64 for at least a year.
mm-hmm.
And in 65, that's when our band, the Prime Movers Blues Band, started playing. And I remember seeing that guitar was hanging on the wall for $135. It was a 59 Sunburst.
Mm-hmm.
And before the Prime Movers started, I played in a band called the Spiders with my best friends from high school.
Yeah.
I used to rent that Les Paul for $5 a night to go out and play frat parties, but it didn't mean anything to me. I mean, it was totally new, the idea of electric guitars. Who was one there, and I played it. It never meant much to me until 65 when the Paul Butterfield band came to Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
And that would have been, yeah, 1965. They played in Detroit a lot. And we were interested in blues, so we'd go in and hear them. And that's when I first saw Mike Bloomfield
Mm-hmm.
with the Butterfield band. God, I just watched the Bob Dylan movie this last week. That was really strange. Have you seen that one?
I have the one where a different actor plays him at different stages in the
Yeah.
game.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a trippy film. Yes.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Bloomfield played a 63 Telecaster. That's what he first played
Mhm.
with Butterfield. And I never really liked the Tele. And when I saw
Mhm.
that, I started thinking, I got to get a Telecaster because I thought Bloomfield was the greatest. Then 2 weeks later, then they came back 2 weeks later and he didn't have the Telecaster. He had a gold top Les Paul.
Mhm.
And that's when I thought, that's the Les Paul. That's what I've been borrowing from Herb. That's what Freddie
Mhm.
King plays on the front of his album, on the Kent album. Freddie King sings.
Mhm.
And I raced up to Herb David's the next morning and it was gone. Now I wanted that Les Paul. And the
Mhm.
person that bought it was my friend George Mallory that taught lessons at Herb David's. He was the only black player I knew that played Chet Atkins. He was from
Mhm.
West Virginia and he taught up at Herb's. He bought it. And
Mhm.
here I had that 63 Jazzmaster and I went over to see George and we traded. He didn't care, just he liked the guitar a good deal. So
Mhm.
so he got that Jazzmaster, stripped it down, painted it red, white, and blue like a Buck Owens guitar,
Yeah.
and I had the Les Paul, which
Mhm.
I played that Les Paul until 1967, spring of '67. Bloomfield called me and wanted to buy it. He offered to buy it earlier than that, but I declined. Before Butterfield broke up, their last gig in Detroit, probably in '66,
Yeah.
was Paul Butterfield's birthday on a Sunday, and they invited us in. So our
Mhm.
band, it was closed. They closed down the bar, and we went down and played for the Butterfield band.
Mhm.
And that's when Mike said to me, "I really want that Les Paul, and I'll trade you my gold top and $100."
Mhm.
I didn't do it. And then he called. That would have been December, and then in April he called me again. He'd moved to the West Coast and started Electric Flag.
Mhm.
And I think, well, they'd been to Europe. And I think he saw Eric Clapton playing or Jeff Beck, somebody playing a Sunburst Les Paul.
Yeah.
George Gruen likes to think that Mike Bloomfield started the Les Paul thing
Mhm.
with the guitar that he got from me, but I don't know if that's true or not because he already had a gold top. What made him want to get the 59? I wonder, because the gold top is what he played on East West. It was a killer sounding guitar.
Did it have P90s though, or
Yeah,
P100s?
gold top
What?
has P90s.
Yeah.
So he called me in April
So
and
maybe
I
he
said,
wanted
all
the
right.
humbuckers.
He wanted the humbuckers. So
Mhm.
he sent me the gold top at $100 and I sent him the 59 and he would have gotten that in June. And that was the summer that I first met Jerry Garcia when he played in Ann Arbor at West Park. And I was making some Stratocasters out of walnut that's when I made, well, 67 would have been when I met Jerry, yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
Because I was making a walnut bodied Stratocaster for a friend of mine from this big stash of walnut that I had.
Mhm.
And he came to my house and he saw what I was doing and he wanted to buy a guitar. At the time, I had a 1939 D18 Martin that had been trashed and didn't have a neck, so I made a neck for it. And I put an ebony fretboard on it and inlaid it with big Roman numerals 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 12, jigsawed out of ivory. And he thought that was really cool. It was just a kind of a fun thing to do, you know.
Mhm.
Here's numbers, you won't miss your fret that way.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he said, I would like to get a Stratocaster. I like that walnut that you're using there. And he wanted a tunematic bridge on it. He didn't want a tremolo. I go, great. And later that summer, then went to San Francisco. Mike Bloomfield invited our band out, and he would be our host and get us gigs. And for a month, we lived in the heliport in Sausalito, where the Electric Flag practice. A heliport is a giant warehouse, a hangar for planes.
Yep.
And there were 3 of them there. One had the Quicksilver Messenger Service in it, one had Electric Flag, and the other one had a band called the Sons of Champlain. Mm-hmm. And we were all a bunch of hippies, I guess. And we slept on the floor of the heliport for a month. Every morning the flag would come in and we'd have to leave, or we could hang out and listen to him. But now at that point I had Bloomfield's Gold Top and he had my Sunburst. Mm-hmm. So at that point I'm hearing him play with the Electric Flag and I'm thinking, oh, I want a Sunburst. You know? But everyone would tell you that a 54 Gold Top Rat Tail is one of the most desirable sounding Les Pauls that you can have. They're pretty special.
Cedar Creek Custom Case Shop is your premier fretted instrument custom case maker, and we invite you to create a musical instrument case unlike any other, one that's unique to you. Every Cedar Creek custom case is hand-built by highly skilled craftspeople using only select woods, Providence Forge hardware, and premium instrument-friendly materials. At Cedar Creek Custom Case Shop, we are dedicated to helping you design the case of your dreams. Find out more at cedarcreekcases.com. Are you serious about the business of guitar? Then you need to join us on Patreon. We're building a future where guitar makers are able to live prosperous lives making instruments that inspire the musical experience, which helps to create a more beautiful world. Where others who are passionate about the guitar can thrive, those who help in the promotion and resale, trade shows, writing of books and articles are supported as a valuable part of the community. A community where we explore with curiosity and encourage those around us in their endeavors. With a community effort, we can accomplish far more than we can individually. So let's be serious about your guitar business and join us on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Jamie Gale Music. We are better together, so let's do this together. I love where we've been, and I'm excited about where we're going.
So you're at the heliport. You know, I don't know if you know this. Do you know Steve Klein?
Sure.
The guitar maker? Yeah. Steve's shop is in a place just like that. It's airport hangars. It's a small airport. And it's a row of hangars in just, Sonoma County there in California. I wonder if it's a similar place or
Steve Klein.
Or not. Yeah, Steve Klein, yeah.
He wasn't there at the Artisan show, but Steve Coffin was there last week.
Yeah.
So Steve Klein's still making guitars. In fact, I've got one of the books. He's got a hardcover book that they gave me. So that Summer of Love is what that summer was. We played at various little places around the Haight-Ashbury area. Mm-hmm. And one morning, Bloomfield came into the helicopter airport and said, "Hey, you guys, wake up. You're playing at the Fillmore tonight." We go, "What?" He goes, "You're playing at the Fillmore. You're going to open for Cream." And my older brother, who was the boss of the band, he goes, "No way. We're not ready for that. We're not." He goes, "Yes, you are." That's when Barry Goldberg got sick. He had hepatitis. Mm-hmm. And he was in the hospital and they couldn't play. So we took the gig. We opened for Cream. And we got down to the Fillmore at about 4 p.m. to bring our equipment in. And we come in the side and there's a little cement steps going up on the stage. And Bill Graham holds his arms out and said, "Hey, you don't need any equipment." I had a deluxe amp. We had a B18 Ampeg basement amp, small combo stuff. My brother played harmonica through a concert. And he goes, "Nope, you don't need stuff. We have equipment." And we look up on the stage and there's a stack of Marshalls and a stack of Twins, because Bloomfield would piggyback Twins together. And my brother says, "No way." He actually said to Bill Graham, "Out of the way, motherfucker. If we don't have our amp, we're not playing." So we set up all these little amps in the front stage in front of all the wall of sound. And there's the curtains are down, of course. And when it was time to play, at some point you hear someone say, and here they are from Detroit, Michigan, the Prime Movers Blues Band, and somebody pulls the curtain up, and the curtain rises up like this. And at the same time, there's a huge fishnet all the way across the ballroom, and they pull that, and floating down are all these balloons, hundreds of balloons. And it was just frightening. It was just, that's enough to, I mean, it was, the whole thing was a stoned atmosphere.
Yeah.
Like 1,000 hippies out there. And
It doesn't sound very terrifying, Dad. I'm sorry, but a sea of balloons and stoned hippies doesn't sound very scary to me these days.
Having to play for a group that size. But when we did it, I remember guitars out of tune, always worrying about tuning the last second. Yeah. And we started in the key of F, which is a hard key to play in tune for me. At least it was. Eric Clapton was there. I saw him backstage. I really didn't hardly even know who he was. I mean, I had the basic idea. I think that the Bluesbreaker album had come out. I think that came out before Fresh Cream. And that was the summer, though, man. We saw Janis Joplin with Big Brother and the Holding Company, and Yorma and the Jefferson Airplane. It was quite the experience until there was no more money and the band wasn't getting along, and we drove home, then broke up. That band, we drove all the way home, not speaking to each other. It was horrible.
Wow. What year was this?
It was 67.
67.
So I came back and bought a 335 on one of Humbucker pickups. And I went through a lot of guitars in that period. I went from a 335 to a Guild Starfire, then a 59 Strat. The first time I really tried a Strat, 58 Strat, then back to another 335. And by that time, I was through with the blues bands. We were approaching 1969. That's the year I got married. My wife, Joan, and I had got married in November of 69. A year later, or a year and a half later, 2 years, we had our first daughter, Meredith. At that point, I had started my own guitar repair business. I was still playing in bands, but not as much. I played in a country band in Detroit with some buddies, but it was more fixing guitars. I put in 1969, I started my first official business called Erlewine Instruments. And it was in the basement of my house and on the edge of Ann Arbor, out on a farm. And my cousin Mark Erlewine joined me about a year later. He moved to Ann Arbor where all the hippies were and his older cousins were. It was cooler than what he was doing. And we became partners for a couple of years. It was during those years that I built Albert King's Lucy guitar. In 71, I finally built Jerry Garcia's guitar. It took him 3 years to get a hold of me and say he finally wanted it. So in 71 into 72, I had the same black walnut. We bought a whole tree. Mark and I bought a whole walnut tree that had been felled in 1925. And it was stickered in a barn north of Ann Arbor. And I forget how we found that, but somebody told us about it. Someone had cut and stickered big slabs of beautiful black walnut, perfectly stickered. That means it's got airspace for it to dry, air dried. And there was a sticker on it that said, put in barn, May something or other, 1925. So at that point, it would have been about 46 years old. I think we got that in 67. And so that's what I made a number of instruments out of back in Ann Arbor. I made a Les Paul, which I have seen in the last couple of years. It's surfaced.
Mhm.
I made 2 Strats. One of them still in Ann Arbor. One was for Jerry. And I made Albert King's Lucy from that wood. And that would take me up to 1972.
Mhm.
And I gave Albert King the guitar when he played at the Grandee Ballroom in Detroit.
Mhm.
And I was backstage. And when I gave it to him, he was counting out money. They were trying to pay him for the gig, but they were giving him Canadian money. He wouldn't take
In
it. He
Detroit.
said, I don't want that funny money. And he says to me, Meredith was born. He goes, tell your daughter her godfather says hello. So I always tell Meredith that her godfather was Albert. Albert was a funny guy. He would call me he always called me Dan. When I was building that guitar at that period, Joan and I left the farm because bad people moved in at the other rented house across the field.
Mhm.
A motorcycle guy, and they were rude and horrible and bad people. So we left and we lived with Joan's parents for half a year.
Mhm.
And so one day we're at dinner and her brother Mark says, hey, Dan, I think it's Albert King. Because that's when I was making him the guitar. He goes, he's asking for Dave. So Albert always called me Dave. And he was good to me.
Mhm.
I saw Albert King for the last time the year before he died. Would have been 93, I think. That was after I'd moved to Ohio. I'm getting a little out of order here, but he played at I forget the name. It was the bar in Columbus. Maybe it was the Dell. He had a pickup band, which a lot of those guys did when they traveled. His band was not bad, but it wasn't what he was used to. So he's tough on a band.
Mhm.
And we went up and met him in his dressing room, introduced to my daughter and her friend and Joan and I. And then we go down here the show, and at one point he's playing a slow blues, and he's saying, "Now my guitar," just like B.B. King would do. My guitar is named Lucy,
Mhm.
and this guitar is the only one like this. And when I was at the Ann Arbor Blues Festival, he says, this young boy come up to me, and he goes, "You have his glasses all down like this." Well, I didn't even wear glasses then. He's just making up a story. He goes, "Mister, I want to make you a guitar." And I said, you think you can do it? I go, yeah. And he goes, well, he did, ladies and gentlemen. And tonight, that man is here tonight with his wife, Mr. and Mrs. And he forgot my name.
Dave.
And it was still, the crowd everyone's waiting. And Albert King went like this. He went, oh, he just called the powers that be, and he goes, Dan Erlewine. That was the first time he called me Dan. God rest his soul. In 75,
Wait a second. How did you feel in that moment?
I felt great.
Yeah.
How do you think I would feel? So proud that Albert King remembered my name and that he was playing my guitar 11 years later. He had a lot of flying V's, not a lot, but 2 or 3 other guys made him V's. And I would imagine some of them might have been better, but he didn't. He played mine the most.
Yeah.
Because when I saw him at the Blues Festival, that was 71,
Mhm.
and he played there. And I went up to him after the show and I said, Mr. King, I have black walnut wood that's the same color as your skin. It would look so beautiful on you, and it would make you a Lucy. And he came over to my shop and spent the afternoon in my shop, and I measured up his flying V. I just found the drawing that I made that day. It was on a big piece of graph paper,
Mhm.
and Seal, the young girl that works in my shop, found it behind a big chest over in the basement. And it's about this big, and it has pencil drawings and tracings, and Joan's taking it out and having it framed.
Wonderful.
But he wanted Lucy in the fretboard in pearl. He wanted that. He didn't want a V peg head. He wanted the Gibson Jazz peg head, like the Super 400. He wanted to have style, and he wanted his name in the fretboard. And he went through all the pearl and abalone that I had, and he wanted both colors. So it would, when under the lights, it would show and show. Took me about a year to make it. That was in 71. And it took a year. What with raising a daughter and working on guitars. And I finally delivered it to him in 72. And I'd already delivered Jerry's guitar to him, because I started them both at the same time. In 71, we flew out to California. Meredith was 1, and she was born in 71. She was a baby. And I had finished Jerry Garcia's Strat and flew out to the Napa Valley, Healdsburg, and we were in Napa, I think. Healdsburg is over across the bridge in Sonoma Valley, I think. We were across the bridge close to Healdsburg, and it's where the Mondavi vineyards are. And we were up in the mountains because Joan's uncle, who was the director of education for the state of Ohio for the Ronald Reagan administration, had a villa and a grape farm up in the mountains, and we stayed there. And Jerry came up in a Porsche. And you've probably seen that video or photos of him.
You sent it to me years ago. It's a
Yeah.
short video. It's not very long. Probably done on
Short little video, and there's
high
Jerry.
8 film at the time, right?
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
high 8 or
Super 8 or something.
Super 8.
Yeah.
Super 8.
Super 8, yeah.
Picture of Jerry. There was 2 videos. Well, I can't find one. The one you saw, it just shows him kind of going like this. The other one.
No, I see. There's a car. I've seen him driving up. You filmed him driving up in the car.
I don't remember.
Is that just my memory? Is that like Albert King in your glasses? I've
Could be
imagined
your
that I've seen the film with the Porsche. Maybe.
It was a video of him giving me the money, and I charged him $500 for it, but he gave me $900, which is a lot of money in 1971 to a broke hippie guitar maker.
Yeah.
So he gives me the money, and I holds up my hands. I go like this, and I hold like $900. He gives me the money. Jerry was the philanthropist.
Yeah.
I mean, he had a lot of people make him guitars because he was generous.
And again, a special moment. I mean, it's a big compliment.
But that takes me up to 1975 when we left Ann Arbor. Mark Erlewine and I broke up our partnership. He went to Austin, Texas with a bunch of young people from Ann Arbor that wanted to go west. Mark has been there all these years since, running his business called Erlewine Instruments. He took the name. I changed my name to Dan Erlewine's Guitar Hospital.
Yeah. Where is that in Texas?
Mark's in Austin.
Austin, okay. Yeah.
We moved to Big Rapids, where my family had moved, because I wanted to raise my kids in a smaller town. And I loved to fish on the Muskegon River. That was one reason. And I had a shop there for 11 years. I would go around in the tri-county area of Michigan within a 100-mile radius and go to music stores and pick up work and bring it in. I'd also have work shipped up from Ann Arbor. until 1984. In 1984 and 83, I made a couple of 7-string guitars out of that walnut.
Mm-hmm.
I made a scroll peghead bass, and I made a double neck guitar mandolin in a couple of year period there. And in 1984 is when I shot and made the 7-course videotapes at Dan Erlewine Guitar Hospital Repair Course Series.
Mm-hmm.
And that was done on the first Panasonic consumer grade camera. It was a PK 957, something like that. One of those big things. It's VHS, and it's in camera edit. You cannot go back, and if you say the wrong thing, it's there.
Mm-hmm.
Even you couldn't edit it out at that time. But that was 1984, and we took those tapes to the 1984 NAMM show in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
Brian Gallup and I drove. Brian was
Yep.
working with me.
Brian was
Gallup
the
and I
the
drove
young
there
man behind the camera, wasn't he, at that time, I think, if I
often.
remember
Yeah.
correctly? Yeah.
Brian and I are very close. Always have been.
Mm-hmm.
As a sidestep, I would say that we just, at the Artisan Guitar Show, we donated a Jerry Garcia Strat to the Jerry Garcia Foundation for them to raffle off as a fundraiser. And we'll see, there's probably going to be a lot of publicity come from that.
Mm-hmm.
But we went to the NAMM show, and I was showing my videotapes at the Jim Dunlop booth. You know Jim Dunlop.
Yeah, yeah.
He was, for me, it was the main source for fret wire for most builders, really.
Yep.
Plus all his products, Dunlop Manufacturing. And he
Picks,
invited me to come
strings,
out.
peg winders, all that sort of thing
All
at that time
kinds of
also, or
peg
yeah.
winders and all kinds of polishes. And
Mm-hmm.
early on, he was probably the biggest one of that. And he invited me to come out and demonstrate fretting at his booth. So I made a ebony and maple fret block with Jim Dunlop inlaid in it, and I would put frets in and take them out and show my videotapes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's at that show, Creston Stewart, Kix is his nickname, Kix Stewart, who is the founder of Stewart McDonald. He was there with the Stewart McDonald, had their first booth there, 1984. And what they were showing, they were mostly a banjo company at that point. In fact, they were showing their electric mandolin, which had the Parsons White string bender in it.
Mm-hmm.
And he saw those videos, and he must have thought, that's interesting, because later that year, he came up to visit me in Big Rapids and offered me a job. He wanted me to be the guy that would take them into the guitar field.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, he said, what I'd like to do is have you be the captain of the ship and bring us into port. And I told him, Stuart, there's no way, that's not I couldn't do that, which I couldn't. But I did end up moving to Ohio in 1986. And I worked there until I retired 4 or 5 years ago. And definitely in the years from 1986 till now, Stewart McDonald has gotten into the guitar market.
Just little.
And I'm proud that I did a really good job of helping him there. So at StewMac, my job was, along with a lot of really good friends, developing tools, education, writing books and videos, going to trade shows. And I must have gone to the NAMM show at least 18 or 20 times over those years.
Mm-hmm.
You've been to them. You know what they're like.
Yes, sir.
They're fun and tiring.
Yeah, but
Stuart
work shouldn't be
McDonald
too easy.
StewMac is only a mile from here in town,
Yeah.
so I go there a lot. I still have the key, and I still have all my friends there. I do a little bit of video work with StewMac still,
Yep.
and that company has grown immensely in the last 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
The old StewMac was bought by investors,
Mm-hmm.
and the idea is to grow the company,
Mm-hmm.
which we have.
Mm-hmm.
It's twice as big now, at least.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking,
That's all right. You know, it's your work with StewMac that so many of the guitar makers that I've worked with, know you for. It's when you were with us at the NAMM show in 2020, I think it
2020.
was. Yeah, January 2020. You were there at the booth and you had your, I forget what those things are called, your wearable
My
magnifying
Optivisor.
glasses.
My Optivisor.
Your
That should go there.
Optivisor. And there were guitar makers from all over the world who didn't know they would ever have a chance to meet you.
That was-
People from Israel and Russia and places where they've seen you on
it was
video. And
humbling. I know it. They were in line.
Yeah.
People standing. My wife couldn't believe it.
Well, your videos, Dan, didn't just help the people here in North America. There are a number of guitar makers that are very isolated in the world. There's only 2 or 3 guitar makers in South Africa. There's only there's one guitar maker in Iceland. There's so there are guitar makers who are good guitar makers, but they're isolated. And so it was things like your videos that gave them the chance to acquire the skills when they didn't have peers around. You had other people around you, and the people who started guitar making in the 1960s, people like Steve Klein and Richard Hoover and Dana Bourgeois, they all tell stories of they didn't know anyone else could make a guitar. They all had a book. They all call it a not so good book. I won't name it, but they all say we had this kind of book that we had to sort of decipher through and figure out. But you made all those skills much more attainable and much easier for these people to grasp. And I don't know that we could even calculate your influence on guitar makers globally, Dan. And well, I'll take this opportunity to say thank you.
I'm pretty proud about that, for sure.
Yeah. It's amazing. The thing that's happening right now that's so remarkable is knowledge has been decentralized. You used to have to travel and find a master somewhere, and you'd have to, often pay a lot of money to be around the master, or really submit yourself to weird, harsh conditions sometimes to be an apprentice to a master. And now, what you did so many decades ago now and putting it on VHS now is available on the internet. And of course, you have many, many videos on the internet where you can gain access to information pretty fast and easy. It's become almost demonetized, the access to information. And so, but you were ahead of that curve.
In 1984, nobody was really willing to share information.
Mm-hmm.
And there weren't that many then. Like you say, there's one person in Africa or something. There weren't that many repair shops in the country, in America.
Mm-hmm.
Not like there is today. The big ones would have been in New York, Chicago, Denver, San Francisco, LA.
Sure. Nashville, wherever there's a major music market, I imagine, with a lot of musicians. Yeah, pretty remarkable how things have grown. Your friend and former apprentice, Brian Gallup, I mean, the Gallup School has produced, the last time he told me, maybe a couple of years ago, that they had surpassed 2,500 students. So there's somewhere between 2,500 to 3,000, repairers and guitar makers that come out of that school, and you played a part of that for Brian's story also. And so I don't know how many repair shops and guitar makers there are around the world now, but it's thousands, because even StewMac. So nobody should care about StewMac unless you want to try and repair or fix a guitar or build a guitar, right? And StewMac's following on YouTube is almost 1 million people, I think. It's really substantial. There's a lot of people working on guitars out there in the world these days.
It's really amazing, I know.
Yeah. Yeah. So now there's one story that we didn't get there. And I think that there's an interesting part of pop history. Your drummer. Was he a drummer in your band, the Prime Movers, or was that a different band? Was that the Spiders, or who was that?
That was Jim Osterberg, Iggy Pop. He was the first drummer in the Prime Movers was Spider, because Spider was the drummer in our friends' bands. We called ourselves the Spiders, because he was older than us. And then when the Spiders broke up, Spider joined my brother and I, and we started a band called the Prime Movers. And Spider was our drummer until we wanted to be a blues band, and Spider hated blues, so we quit. But the funny thing was he loved Jimmy Reed, but he didn't like blues. That never made sense. So when he quit, we had no drummer, and there was a band in town called the Iguanas. It was the high school, just out of high school frat band, and Jim Osterberg was their drummer, and he liked the idea of being in a blues band. It was cooler than being in just a cover band, so he joined. And as far as I'm concerned, we named him Iggy because we used to first call him Iguana. Hey, Iguana. And we shortened it to Iggy. And Iggy and I were roommates for a year. So really it was my wife Joan that introduced me to Iggy even before he actually became our drummer. And Iggy was with the band for at least a year, maybe a year and a half, when he went off to become a blues drummer in Chicago. And he took lessons from Sam Lay, who was Butterfield's drummer. And when he came back from that, he started his own band, and that became the Stooges.
Yeah. The rest is history.
I'd love to see Iggy someday. I haven't seen him all these years. We've heard from him once, but life goes on.
1970s was the last time?
Well, it'd be early 70s, yep.
Yeah.
When he went into some of his dark ages, he's come out of it, but there was a number of years when I think Iggy was pretty strung out on stuff. That probably shouldn't be saying that, and scrap that.
I don't think it's news. There was a lot of experimenting going on in those days, and I think he's well known for being, him and Bowie and Warhol and people trying also very open and free to new experiences, let's say. So no surprise there. So Dan, I would like to hear a couple of your observations about what is different today, what you think some major pivotal moments were sort of along the way with the world of guitar and the way that you experienced it. And, what do you think of the evolution of all of this since you were there much at we would say the sort of really early days of the electric guitar when you got fired for buying an electric guitar? I mean, that's a very Ferrari moment. Do you know this about Ferrari? Ferrari will not sell you a car if you own a Lamborghini. Really? They have this rivalry. Yeah. You cannot, and if you do buy a Lamborghini after you buy a Ferrari, you will not be permitted to buy another Ferrari, and they won't service it for you. You're like ostracized.
Well, I think the changes in the guitars when it wasn't just Gibson and Fender and Martin and Gretsch, and the younger generations like myself and others that branched out and started building guitars.
Mm-hmm.
Steve Klein, Paul Reed Smith, Santa Cruz, Collins, all these people that wanted something different and had their own ideas of what was good. And then you have hardware. You have Steinberger. You have new tremolos being made. You have Kaler. You have all that. You have it's the music of the 70s and 80s that changed too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when I go to an AM show or any show today, it's unbelievable how many companies there are.
Mm-hmm.
Eddie Van Halen. It was the musicians that helped the guitar companies grow. Wouldn't you think?
I certainly do. It certainly is what gains popularity. You know, I've tried to understand the evolution of guitar, and particularly the electric guitar. And you know, I hypothesize a few things. You know, one is an inspiration. Someone has an idea. It's, oh, can you do this? The second category was problems. Like we're trying to solve a problem. Like in the beginning of the 20th century to the mid 20th century, we were trying to solve the problem of volume, right? And so the resophonic guitar, the arch-up guitar, the amplified electric guitar, you know, these were a number of iterations to try and solve a problem that you couldn't be heard if you were a guitar player amongst horns and loud drums and this sort of thing, as venues got larger. But the third category that developed that I was really a bit surprised about was the unintended consequence. And so, as an example, if you want more volume and you develop, the Dober brothers develop a louder guitar. They do it out of metal. They do it with this cone sort of system. It was indeed louder, but it also sounded nothing like, you know, a flat top guitar. And so as a result, yes, it's louder, but is it a guitar or is it what you wanted? And the answer realistically was no. If you played the songs you were trying to play, you'd say this is kind of a different instrument. Now, the upside is it sounded interesting. It made you do things you wouldn't have done otherwise. And therefore you were inspired. You made new music and that became new styles of music. But that was an unintended consequence. That wasn't I asked you for a louder guitar and I got a louder guitar. I got a different instrument in the end. It's same category, but a different instrument. And, you know, the Les Paul was, as you sort of said, you didn't feel particularly one way or the other about it until you saw somebody like a Butterfield or a Clapton use it in a way where people weren't using guitars. But it was sold as a jazz guitar. And when the jazz guitar market got the Les Paul, they said, doesn't sound right, doesn't feel right, doesn't play right, it's heavy, it's awkward, you know, and they did not accept that guitar. But it took someone saying, oh, but this overdrives the amplifier differently, it's got more sustain, it makes me do something different. And then they wrote a body of music that was really inspiring. And then other people heard that, like you, and said, you watch Butterfield and go, oh, that's what you can do with that guitar. I want to do that too. And then you build up the songbook and the movement, a whole new genre of music is born because of what those instruments do. But really, it's kind of an unintended consequence, isn't it? It wasn't someone had a vision for the music and then designed the instrument. It's they designed the instrument and it inspired new things. And so it's then a combination of what the musicians do with the instrument. But actually, very few situations that I've gone through have been a musician with an idea and a guitar maker making it happen, or a guitar maker with an idea and the musician's making it happen. It's usually been, you kind of make something, you put it out there and you see what happens. And sometimes you get really lucky.
Cedar Creek Custom Case Shop is your premier fretted instrument custom case maker, and we invite you to create a musical instrument case unlike any other, one that's unique to you. Every Cedar Creek custom case is hand-built by highly skilled craftspeople using only select woods, Providence Forge hardware, and premium instrument-friendly materials. At Cedar Creek Custom Case Shop, we are dedicated to helping you design the case of your dreams. Find out more at cedarcreekcases.com. Are you serious about the business of guitar? Then you need to join us on Patreon. We're building a future where guitar makers are able to live prosperous lives, making instruments that inspire the musical experience, which helps to create a more beautiful world. Where others who are passionate about the guitar can thrive, those who help in the promotion and resale, trade shows, writing of books and articles are supported as a valuable part of the community. A community where we explore with curiosity and encourage those around us in their endeavors. With a community effort, we can accomplish far more than we can individually. So let's be serious about your guitar business and join us on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Jamie Gale Music. We are better together, so let's do this together. I love where we've been, and I'm excited about where we're going. What do you think?
I think that, as I was saying, that once you had Leo Fender made a tremolo on a guitar or vibrato, and then Bigsby made this, and then Floyd Rose made that, and then Kaler made this, and it grew and grew and grew, the hardware and the types of pickups. This pickup wasn't good enough. Young people picking up on this, and it happened in a really fast from the 70s to the 90s. So much nowadays, people are finding new ways to do things, because I think it's hard to find anything new that people will buy. I think you really have to think to find something that's outside the box. And even then, it's hard to get people to try new things.
It's hard to get people who have already developed habits to try new things. So right now, the guitar market's in a bit of a slump because there's a lot of possibilities of those existing things. And do you really need another Stratocaster? And do you need to buy a Stratocaster now? Because there's a lot out there. You'll be able to get one any day you want a Stratocaster. There's going to be one waiting for you on Reverb, in the guitar shop, somewhere. There's a Strat ready for you to buy. And so when the economy's a bit confused or depressed, those things slow down. But brands like Strandberg, who's making ergonomic headless guitars right now and multiscale extended range instruments, they're reporting double-digit gains. Dingwall, another one, multiscale, extended range instruments that have new and innovative ideas in them. They're growing right now. They can't keep up. They're trying to figure out how to make more instruments, while the instruments that already have a very established marketplace right now kind of overdid it, frankly. They made too many. They didn't keep the supply and demand in ratio. And so there actually are new ideas, and there are people who are growing and creating new music. And that's also associated with technology that does it. So a guitar, if it went lower in the 1950s, we couldn't record it anyways, and we couldn't reproduce it properly. But today, we can reproduce lower and higher sounds than we could in the 1950s with microphones and with speakers and recording systems. There were limitations of the systems. And now we have this really high fidelity that's allowed the instruments to take up more space with clear articulation and a broader range. So if you're looking for a Stratocaster that has something new, or Les Paul has something new, no, it's probably already been said. But if you're willing to step outside of that range, the acoustic guitar is really interesting, because you see a lot of modern acoustic guitar players, who are doing things because the acoustic guitar has now been synthesized with a Stratocaster. So a lot of these fancy players, and they're old now, people like Tommy Emmanuel or Don Alder or Manelli Jamal, Adam, these guys, they were all electric guitar players who came to acoustic later. But it meant that they have an expectation for acoustic guitars to be able to play easier, to be to faster articulation. They're not so concerned about, being a banjo killer to keep up with loud volumes, because they're plugged in anyways. And so the acoustic guitar is evolving in interesting ways right now also. But if you're just looking at a J200 or a Martin D28 or D18 and wondering what's new, it's not there. You got to look somewhere else.
Ain't that the truth?
Yeah. So a lot of great music has been made on them, and people will continue to reenact that music. They'll say, I want to play the great music that was written of this time period. But all of that style of music has mostly been explored. And it's all been said, mostly. So we look elsewhere for new inspiration.
I like the multiscale. I've never owned one, but I played a number of them at Artisan, and that might be something I'd be very interested in. Simply because the way it feels to my hand. I think for me, the position that it puts your hand in is way more comfortable at least when you get older. Have you played many multiscales?
Yes. Yeah, many. Yeah.
It puts your hand where it needs to be ergonomically. As you come up the neck, it gets closer. That might be something I would like to make a bolt-on neck, easy to make, put on a body.
Yeah.
We're interested right now in we're going to make some small bodies, maybe telly or telly shape. I just want something that's smaller and shorter scale. We had a music master in the shop this year that I really loved playing. I'm finding as I got older that when I pull the guitar out here, like this, I want it here.
Yeah.
I want it in here. That means for this one, I'm just going to cut it out so it sits over my thigh, but that's the classical position. And somehow it's gotten to be, if you're sitting down, the neck's way out here, at least for a little guy. So having the 23-inch scale was wonderful. And I want to make a little smaller body with a short scale.
Yep. I mean, that's exactly why Strandberg guitars are selling so well. Is one of the reasons is they actually have that secondary cutout so you can play there. But it's not just about the classical position for them. One of the things that's changed is that people now play guitar sitting in front of their computer. And so you can play a guitar with that extra leg position in an office chair or a gaming chair, as younger people will call it. It's made for the video games, And so they can play a guitar in front of the same computer they're playing their video games on, and they can play it in a position that's convenient. So the guitar is actually evolving exactly as you just pointed out, with a little bit closer to you, a higher sort of position, and it has to do with the fact that we're actually sitting a lot more. When I watch videos these days of really remarkable guitar players, they're sitting in a chair, no strap on, in front of a computer camera.
Like this. That's why this thing sits there all day long. And every half an hour, I'll pick it up and play it for 5 minutes.
Yep.
Just to relax my hands and then set it back down.
Yeah. It's one of the things I love about the guitar is how it constantly evolves. People get caught up in a time period and they think that the guitar has stopped changing and they proclaim its death. But the guitar is the people's instrument, and the people constantly evolve and the guitar constantly evolves. And if you know where to look, you'll see the guitar is evolving still today and has never stopped. Never stopped.
One thing that I've done with the guitar in the last, 15, 20 years that most people haven't really picked up on. Have you seen the little capos that I screw onto my fretboard?
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, you did that with Adam Buchwald and Irish guitars, didn't you? You do a version of that?
They didn't sell very many of them, but to me, it's an incredible thing. People that sit down and play it.
I think it's on the wall there, isn't it?
I got one. I'm going to get it. It's these.
Yes.
It's a 4-string capo.
Yep.
It's okay to do this on the interview?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right now I've got it at the 2nd fret. So I've capoed 4 strings, but the bottom ones are still where they were.
Yep.
So I have a drop string automatically. And one on the top. I can play my folk chords, but I can do this. That's like a banjo tuning now. It's a different way of playing.
Yeah.
So you can get a different sound that you can't get otherwise. If I played an E position, it would be a 7th chord. So you wouldn't be playing. Whoops, you can't play a boogie in it. I would love to see more. I'm going to make some maple necks bolt on with this capo system in them. You can't do that without that capo that way.
Yeah. One of the, I really enjoy as a musician being forced into an uncomfortable position. Now, don't take that the wrong way, but you throw that capo on somewhere and just say, just see what happens. Just go with it. And you're going to do things that you don't otherwise do. And, many times I can think of some of my favorite things to do on a guitar were because of some weird, unfortunate position. So there was a Michigan guitar company called Reverend, and there still exists, but they used to make guitars sort of that Formica style, like a Dan Electro, right? And they were hollow. And the thing that's weird about those guitars, the early Reverends, which I really loved, is I had one of them with a maple neck and 3 lipstick pickups, but with the Formica body, if I put my arm on the guitar, it would bend at the neck joint, and so it would be out of tune if I touched the guitar. So I had to play it in a way where I didn't engage the body for it to stay in tune. However, what ended up happening is, because I did touch the body, is I ended up developing a style when playing that guitar where I would do single note runs and I would alternate between lows and highs, very staccato, in a way where you never really realized the guitar was either in or out of tune, because I wasn't playing more than 1 or 2 notes at a time. And the thing is, I don't think I would play that style without having had that guitar with this quirky sort of limitation to it. And I really love that. I'm glad that I play in that way these days. But it's only because of
I like having baritone
the
guitar.
inefficiencies of that guitar. Yeah.
If you pick up a baritone guitar and play in a band, you will never play what you think. You'll never play something that you already knew, because you won't be in the same key. Baritone is tuned so differently than a guitar that you'd have to put a capo on. So without a capo on the baritone, you'll really learn to play by ear. You have no choice.
Yes.
The things you thought you could play, you won't be in the same key.
Yeah.
That's what taught me that.
I think baritone is really coming into its own finally now, 50 years after the bass guitar and the tenor guitar, is that we're finally getting baritones that have a space. The reason I'm in the place where I am in Tuscany is because of a baritone guitar maker by the name of Bruno Bacci, who I came to visit a number of times and I fell in love with the area. And he's making baritones that people love. And he's got a lot of serious players playing these baritones and a lot of serious stores picking them up. They're electric baritones. And he's dealt with the pickup issue by putting a Telecaster setup, but he's also got a P-bass pickup that's just under the low 3 strings, has a separate volume and output on it. So you can split between a bass amp and a guitar amplifier with 2 different signals. That's a really interesting way of doing it. And he's got a lot of the top players today, like Corey Wong and Mark Lettieri of the Fearless Flyers and Matteo Mancuso, and lots of killer players who have been really inspired by this instrument. And I think that we're finally at the point where baritone is going to stick, because it's kind of been that odd instrument sort of sitting in the wings for a long time, hasn't it?
I've had one for a number of years, and then it kind of inspired me to make one myself. I made a couple of baritones. What's the name of the guy you're talking about?
Bacci. Bacci. Bruno Bacci.
I'm
Yeah.
writing that on. Bruno.
You just have to put in Bacci. Bacci guitars. Bacci.
Got it.
Yeah. Yeah, really, really cool guitars and super inspiring. So, and we've had them on tour, and I have people come back and say, wow, I could write a whole album with this guitar. Because like you said, you just won't play what you already played. You know, it forces, not enforces, you
Very musical.
forces and inspires you into doing something quite different. So tell me about the baritone that you've made. You have a baritone for yourself?
The baritone I made is the one that's called the rocking chair.
Mm-hmm.
It's the one it actually sits on a 3-legged stool.
Okay.
Have you ever seen that?
I don't think so. No, I have to look it up now.
I'll send you some pictures of it.
Okay, please do.
Whenever I used to set up like a Telecaster or Stratocaster electric guitar, on the vise that's holding that aluminum guitar, that vise tilts. So I'd clamp it in the playing position to all the setups, adjust the neck, and I'd like to stand up and just play it without holding it.
Mm-hmm.
And that inspired me to start playing guitar that way.
Mm-hmm.
And then I made a stand, so then I made a guitar that I could bolt to a stand on. It stood on the stand to support it, and it evolved into a 3-legged chair with a post on it. The guitar screws to it. I don't have it here that I can show you, but I'll send you some pictures of it.
Would love to see it.
It's about 3 years ago, the chair broke. It went for 20 years, but some big guys have sat on it, and it broke at one point, and right now it's sitting next door in pieces, and I need to find the time to put the parts back together. But I'll send you a picture if you could put it on this post somehow.
Yeah, we'll figure out how to add the link to it. That's great. We'll do it on our website. And so
playing a guitar that you don't hold is unbelievable. You're just free to.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because of the conversation we were just having. So Bruno Bacci blew up because of a band called the Fearless Flyers with Corey Wong and Mark Lettieri, and they did these videos where they always had the guitars on stands at like 35 degrees. And so they called it the large, medium, and small guitars, and they would have all three guitars on the stands, and they wouldn't have straps on. They do exactly what you're talking about. I wonder if they saw your guitar, your stand. I wonder if they saw your rocking chair and were inspired by it at some point in time. Maybe.
No, that was 20 years ago. I took it to the NAMM show one year, and the Chinese photographers were all over the place taking pictures of it, but I never saw one made. It's too hard.
Yeah.
But it has a baritone neck on it. And if you put a capo on it at the second fret, then it's a normal tuning. But if you take the capo off, you get that extra whole step.
Yes. Yeah. Amazing. Well, Dan, as we're coming sort of to the time where we should consider wrapping it up, but I always like to throw it back to my guests and say, is there a topic that you were hoping that we would discuss today, or a question I might have asked you that hasn't come up yet?
I think I'm good.
Yeah. I did my job.
You did. You want to hear that aluminum guitar?
Sure, why not? Bring it on over.
Take a minute.
Yeah, that's all right.
What I love is this. I've never been able to get bends that far. It's just got the most incredible sound. But bending strings. It's so slippery.
Yeah. Oh, well, I hope to play it one day.
You will.
It'd be great. Well, Dan, thank you so much for taking the time today, for being on Life with Strings Attached. We
Thanks,
appreciate
Jamie.
you sharing your stories. Yeah.
We'll talk
And,
soon.
well, for those of you who regularly listen, Dan and I will talk for another 2 to 3 minutes on the business of guitar. We put that behind a paywall because we're going to talk about the inside business. If you're not in the guitar industry, you shouldn't hear it, frankly. So if you are in the guitar business and you'd like to hear a little bit of Dan's perspective over the last many decades on the business of guitar, head over to patreon.com/the business of guitar. Again, that's patreon.com/the business of guitar. And you'll hear Mr. Dan Erlewine's sage advice on guitar business. Dan, thank you so much for being on Life with Strings Attached. We'll wrap up this section of the show now.
Bye.
Yeah. Thank you for watching and listening. You can find more episodes wherever you listen to your podcasts. And a special thanks to those who support us on Patreon. It's your support that enables us to do this work.